So good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Skłodowska-Curie session on the doctoral networks. My name is Raquel Melguizo. I'm the national contact point for the Skłodowska-Curie actions in the UK. And together with me, I have Antonino Puglisi, who is the national contact point for the European Research Council. I also have with me Blajek Thomas, who is our legal and financial expert. And I also have the pleasure to welcome to this session to Edward Ricketts, who is the project officer at the MSCA Doctoral Networks unit in the European Research Executive Agency, and Richard Hall, who is a professor of biomechanical and oncological engineering at the University of Birmingham. So just a brief overview of how today's session is going to run. So today, Edward will be providing, we'll start the session with an overview of the scheme, the eligibility rules, the funding mechanism, and the evaluation criteria and process, which I will then follow with a brief introduction to the services that we provide, the UK association to Horizon Europe, as well as things to consider when it comes to the submission of your application and also the submission process. Then we'll have a 10 minutes break. And once we return, Professor Hall will share his experience in applying and successfully securing several MSCA Doctoral Network awards, as well as some hints and tips that might be helpful when it comes to prepare your application. And last but not least, we'll go through the questions at the end. So please use the Q&A function there. And before I hand over to Edwards to start his presentation, a bit of housekeeping. All the participants will be muted for the duration of the webinar. There is a chat function that is available and will be monitored, but I will please ask you to use the Q&A function to submit your questions. There is upvoting available, so if there is a question already there, which is similar or the same as the one that you had in mind, please just use that function. And the session will be recorded, so there is no need to frantically take notes. So with that, I will stop sharing and then hand over to Edward to share his... Let me just stop sharing. I know you can see my screen. Here we go. Over to you, Edward.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Raquel, for the introduction. I'm just sharing my screen now. I hope everyone can see this okay. Does this look as it should?
Yeah, we can see your slides. Thank you.
Okay, very good. No, good morning, everyone, and happy to be here with you this morning. Thank you for joining as well. I see a really strong interest in the MSCA Doctoral Networks just from the number of people attending. So this is great to see. So my name's Edward. I'm a project officer for the Skłodowska-Curie Actions Doctoral Networks, based in the Research Executive Agency in Brussels. This is the funding body for the MSCA and some other Horizon Europe programs as well. In this role, I basically help to manage, I don't manage the projects. This is for the coordinator and the consortium, obviously, but I help to kind of steer and monitor a group of doctoral networks projects. I also help out in the evaluation process as well. I'm assigned to the life sciences panel that we have. Obviously, the focus today is on the 2026 call for proposals, which was published just a couple of weeks ago at the end of May. We had a public information day, which was open to everybody, also a few weeks ago on the 3rd of June. The recording is on YouTube if you're interested to see that. But hopefully this session today will complement the information that you already have in the public domain. I have a presentation which, I hope I'll try to do it in about 25 to 30 minutes, not bombard you with too many details, but I will try and give you a kind of practical overview of the current call and what it takes to submit an application. What are some of the things we're looking for in applications, and just a reminder of the key novelties as well for the current call, because I'm aware there is quite a lot of experience and expertise gathered today on applying for these grants. But at the same time, I will try and make it accessible to those of you who are new to this funding scheme as well. And yeah, very happy to answer any questions in the session at the end. It's true that my expertise is mostly in the sort of post-award grant management area. So I think with Raquel and with Richard as well, we should be complementary in terms of answering your questions. So I will then just kick off. So I will try and go fairly quickly through the initial slides. I think most of you are familiar with Horizon Europe and the excuse me, the European funding scheme that is in place. It's dry and hot in Brussels today. That's why I'm need some hydration. So just to kick off, I mean, many of you know this slide, I think probably by heart. What we're talking about today, the MSCA is a key part of the Excellent Science pillar in Horizon Europe. This is the 7-year funding program for research and innovation with a budget of just under 100 billion. And you can see the kind of position of the MSCA actions there in the first pillar, which aims to fund excellent science. As Raquel will go into more detail later on, the UK is associated again as from the 2024 work programme. So I think this is good news for all concerned. And this is what the Excellent Science pillar tries to do. Some of its key objectives. Again, I think most of you are familiar with this. I mean, really the key aim of the MSCA, it's the flagship European program, I would say, for training, for researcher training, both through collaborative projects and through individual funding fellowships, for example, and staff exchanges as well. You can see there the budget for the 7-year period. We are actually celebrating the 30 years of the MSCA actions this year, as you can see on the bottom left of the slide. So there's been a range of kind of promotional events, celebratory events, showcasing the research that we fund through these projects. You maybe have seen some of these. As I say, it's a long-standing reference, this program now, for research and training. We fund research projects in all areas. So it's a totally bottom-up funding scheme. Proposals are assigned to a series of one particular evaluation panel, but it can be submitted in any area. We try to support researchers' training skills and career development at all stages of their career, but there's a particular focus on both PhD students, doctoral students, and also postdocs. Obviously, the doctoral networks we're talking about today, here we are funding collaborative projects with usually up to 15 doctoral candidates. So these are young people enrolled in a PhD program, or they should be enrolled during the project. Some of the other impacts you can see there. I won't go into details, too many details, but these are some of the broader impacts that the MSCA projects and actions seek to have. Attractive working and employment conditions is a key kind of broad goal, as is strong collaboration with the industry and SMEs, but that also includes more broadly the non-academic sector, and I will explain this in a bit more detail later. So the doctoral networks, as I mentioned, we published the 2026 call for proposals at the end of May. The deadline, as you can see there, is in late November. The total budget is significant, substantial, but it's also quite similar to last year's budget for the 2025 call. Just to give you maybe one or two statistics, I don't have these on the slide, but just to give you a kind of an idea. So for the 2024 call, we had, roughly 1,400 proposals submitted and 150 or so funded. So a success rate of just over 10%. For the 2025 call, which we've just concluded, we're doing the grant agreement preparations now. There were 1,600 proposals, so something like 14% increase, and just over 150 funded. So just under a 10% success rate, which is not, it's not great, of course, but it shows that this is a highly competitive program, and you need to score very highly to be funded. Many of you know this already. This isn't this won't be news to you, unfortunately. In terms of the UK, it might be interesting to know we had 230 proposals in the last previous call with UK coordinators, which was the highest of any country, which is quite interesting to note. And I think 13 of those were eventually funded. So we are seeing a kind of increasing strong UK interest and engagement in the doctoral networks, obviously since the association from the 2024 work programme. So that's just to give you an idea of the kind of competitive nature of this funding programme, but I will explain the evaluation criteria and what it takes to be funded a bit later on. I won't explain the other funding schemes today. Okay, so what is a doctoral network project? It used to be called the Innovative Training Networks. So some of you may be familiar with these projects when they were called ITNs. It's one consortium proposing a single research project, but there are interlinked individual doctoral projects which form the core of the overall project. It's 4 doctoral candidates, and we'll come on to the eligibility a little bit later. We do expect to see, that the research is high quality, it's excellent, but we also expect to see that the training and networking supervision aspects are equally kind of strong and convincing and credible, because this really is about research training, this particular funding scheme. Again, just going fairly quickly through the expected impacts. Through this funding scheme, we want to train highly skilled doctoral candidates. We want to improve the attractiveness of research careers in Europe. We all know that there are problems around precarity of research careers and so on. We want to provide funding for, so I'll talk a little bit about the time period later, but it's essentially 3 years of EU funding for a PhD program and a project as part of this one doctoral network. We want to promote intersectoral, interdisciplinary, and international mobility. So I should have said this at the start, but mobility is normally an eligibility requirement for MSCA projects. We expect to see researchers going to different countries in order to do at least part of their work during the project. So secondments would be the classic example. We want to see collaboration between the academic and the non-academic sector. Again, I will provide more details on this a little bit later. And also promote open science and, innovation in general. But I would say the first 2 points, they're probably the most important, I think, to kind of take on board when you're preparing an application. And this really kind of, I would say, summarizes the previous slide in a bit more of a concise way. We want to see, as I said, appropriate supervision. So we want to see doctoral candidates who benefit from a high quality training program, and that includes supervision at the host organization where they are recruited. Ultimately, we want to see these doctoral candidates, DCs, as we call them, to come out of the project at the end with, better career opportunities and better employability through the research that they've done on the project and through the secondments in industry, for example, which we see many projects engaged in. We also expect to see a career development plan. This is a kind of standard deliverable that we have for every doctoral network project. Projects need to put in place a career development plan for each DC, each PhD student that they fund, and to detail how this opportunity to work on the project will boost or benefit the career of each individual. So these are some of the expected outputs. I won't really go through this slide because I think I've kind of covered it in some detail already. But again, it's just a reminder of what we expect to see. So on the academic versus the non-academic sector, then we have these definitions of the academic and non-academic sector. I think just maybe the most important thing to bear in mind is that these are quite broad definitions. So for a standard doctoral network project, it's not a strict requirement to have, say, an industry partner, but we do expect to see intersectoral secondment or intersectoral training opportunities on a project. So while it's not a strict requirement for the classic standard doctoral networks, we do expect to have the participation of the non-academic sector in some way, and it's typically evaluated positively in the evaluation. The non-academic sector, it doesn't quite equate to the private sector. So you can also have, for example, university hospitals, charities, NGOs, these kinds of organizations. And the academic sector, nor does that kind of strictly equate to the public sector. Either you can see some other examples of organizations with a different legal status compared to the academic sector. But more details a bit later on the eligibility criteria. But I just wanted to kind of highlight this definition that we have and the fact that it's not so restrictive. So it's possible to participate in two ways in the doctoral network project as an organization, as a beneficiary. So here you must recruit a doctoral candidate and host them. And you must also ensure that the PhD student is enrolled in a PhD program at your institution, or if this is not possible, then that can be done as an associated partner linked with the beneficiary. So for example, a research institute or agency that doesn't award PhD degrees, the enrollment can be done as a linked associated partner. So beneficiaries, they are full partners, they sign the consortium agreement, they claim costs from the EU. Associated partners are on board as providers of specific training and secondment. They don't claim EU funding, they don't sign the consortium agreement or the grant agreement with us, with the research executive agency. So this is essentially the distinction to know about at this stage. But we do expect. I think all projects do have associated partners who provide quite specific training, access to facilities. Typically they are linked with the beneficiaries. So the people involved in the projects will be working with their peers or their collaborators, and maybe some of them will be brought on board as an associated partner. So we do then have three types of implementation, and more details to come up on this later. The doctoral networks, what I call the standard doctoral networks, these are the multi-partner projects lasting up to 36 person months. So this is the funding period for the PhD student. And then there's an additional 12 months for basically setting up the consortium and the project. So these are 48 months or 4 years in total. We then have two other types of doctoral networks projects. The first is called industrial doctorates. So this, I would say, meets the objectives of the doctoral networks scheme, but it goes further because it requires the mandatory involvement of the non-academic sector in doctoral training. And I'll discuss this in a little bit more detail later. We also have the joint doctorates, which propose the creation of joint doctoral programs, leading to the delivery of, as you can see, either joint or multiple or double doctoral degrees, which are recognized in at least one EU or associated country to Horizon Europe. And I will go through the rules shortly. Maybe just on the numbers, we usually receive, I think, 85 to 90% of the applications in as standard doctoral networks, and a far kind of smaller number in joint doctorates and industrial doctorates. And the budget is kind of, it's one overall budget, but you can basically flag your application as an industrial doctorate or a joint doctorate, and the projects, as you have an idea already, they are relatively different, I would say, but it's one overall budget for all three types of implementation. It's a bottom-up funding scheme, so you can submit your proposal to one evaluation panel, and you can see here the acronyms in the bottom left, corresponding to academic disciplines. They are quite broad. There are various sub-panels within each panel. So on the industrial doctorates then, just to quickly go through, because this is slightly, this is, I mean, not our biggest funding scheme, but it's something where we do see an increasing interest as well. The main difference is that so for the industrial doctorates, there's no ceiling on the secondment time. So this means that each doctoral candidate could spend at least 50% of their time in the non-academic sector. And this non-academic entity could participate as an associated partner and host doctoral candidates in the form of secondments for 50% of their time, if that makes sense. So there is this flexibility as regards the secondments, because this really is a joint effort between industry and academia. Or it could be the case that the non-academic entity could decide to participate as a beneficiary, receive EU funding, and recruit and host a doctoral candidate for the full 100% of their time on the project. So that's really the main difference between the standard doctoral network mode and the industrial doctorates. Sorry, that's the wrong way. The joint doctorates then, for this modality, let's say, there's more flexibility because there's no ceiling on the secondment period. So to promote the kind of impact that we want to see through this particular type of project, applicants who choose the joint doctorates can recruit doctoral candidates for maximum 4 years instead of 3. And this means there's a maximum project duration of basically 5 years instead of 4. There has to be enrollment in a joint or double or multiple PhD, which are delivered by different organizations participating as beneficiaries. And at least one of those has to be based in an EU member state or a Horizon Europe associated country. And then as part of the project, it's required to set up these joint admission selection supervision procedures, which lead to the delivery of a joint PhD program. So on the novelties then, so this is quite an important slide, especially for those of you who are kind of well versed in the doctoral networks project. So one change we've put in place for the 2026 call is that the living allowances are increased. I have a slide later on showing the different allowances and how doctoral candidates and institutions are paid. We recognize, of course, that inflation has, there has been inflation since the start of the program. So we've increased the living allowance. I think it's by around 200 euros a month, the sort of standard rate. This is then multiplied by the country correction coefficient to reflect the cost of living in different EU countries. This has also been reviewed in some cases as well, and as you can imagine, increased in most cases. It's not the case for the other cost categories. Unfortunately, we still have the same allowances. Again, you will see a slide on this, but we still have the same allowances for the mobility, the same level of funding for the mobility allowances and for the institutional costs as well, for the research and training and management coordination costs, which go to the institutions. So the living allowance is the only one that's been increased. Eligibility restrictions, we now have one or two further, essentially checks to check that organizations are not linked or owned by the Chinese Ministry of Industry. We also have additional ownership checks to check that organizations are not owned by Russian entities. These are essentially an extra check that we do with the evaluation and then the grant agreement stage if the proposal is funded. There's a new exception for all doctoral network projects where if a doctoral candidate is recruited by an organization based in a non-associated country, so this is a non-EU, non-Horizon Europe associated country, the PhD enrollment can take place in that country. This was a little bit of an awkward restriction, I think, previously. So the program is a little bit more open in this sense now that the enrollment can take place outside of Europe. But I will come on to the eligibility of countries later. For the first time, each evaluation criterion, there are 3 of them, now has an individual minimum threshold of 3 out of 5. So, and this is for all 3 criteria. So if one proposal scores 2 out of 5 in one criteria, it will not be funded. This is, I think, to kind of bring a little bit more simplicity to the the funding process and the evaluation criteria. So of course you need to have a balanced proposal that has, performed strongly across all three criteria. Secondments then, so we get a lot of questions about secondments. What constitutes a secondment? What are the requirements? Because this is usually an important part of these projects where a doctoral candidate goes to another organization. It can be a beneficiary, it can be an associated partner, benefits from specific training and research work at that partner. It can now be up to 50% of the entire time they spend on the project. Previously, it was 1/3. So this is something that responds to a demand that we've seen, that secondments are increasingly important. There are usually 2, even sometimes 3 secondments on one project. So the PhD student moves around to different partners. On the font size, then you'll see I've somewhat jokingly put this in a smaller font this point. But I do understand this has caused quite a lot of questions amongst applicants already for this call. So I can confirm that the permitted font size allowed within the part B1, so this is the 30-page sort of core part of the proposal, has changed, and it's now size 11. In previous calls, applicants were permitted to use font size 9, I think it was, for tables, for sort of tables summarizing certain information, while the main text could stay larger. For this year's call, that's been replaced by a single rule, where there is this now font size 11 for the main text and for the tables. I realize this is quite detailed, but it's quite an important point nonetheless. The reason for this change, maybe you can imagine, it's to stop applicants. I think we had some applications where there was a lot of information squeezed into tables, which should have been in the main text. So taking advantage of the kind of smaller font size that used to be permitted in tables within the template. So over time, more and more applicants, I think, were doing this, adding tables for objectives, for training, and so on, to squeeze in information that really belonged in the main text. So obviously, this means that there is, I think, now a shorter space, which is not easy overall, and applicants can fit, less text within the same 30-page limit. But the decision we've taken is to try and equalize the playing field, level the playing field in terms of the information in the part B1. So this only applies to the part B1, and then only literature references, which are footnotes, can have a lower font size. So that's really the kind of background to this point, which I know is quite a key one. What are the consequences? Maybe, if this isn't respected, I mean, I think it may be just evaluated as a minor shortcoming. So I think a proposal won't be deemed ineligible if this is not respected, but I think it'll be, flagged by the evaluators and maybe seen as a minor shortcoming. And anything over the 30 pages in the part B1 won't be evaluated. Okay, so I hope that is clear more or less. So to move then to the eligibility rules, again, I will go through this quite quickly because this is easily I think well known and also available in the official documents for the doctoral networks. You need to have at least 3 legal entities independent from each other. So this is for all types of the doctoral networks, also for the joint and industrial doctorates, each established in a different EU member state or Horizon Europe associated country. At least one of those should be based in an EU member state. We don't have a minimum or maximum number of associated partners. I mean, bear in mind that the maximum number of person months we can fund for these projects it's 540. So that corresponds to 15 PhD students undertaking a 3-year project. And I'll come on to the budget in a little bit later. So beneficiaries, as I said earlier, they have to recruit at least 1 doctoral candidate. That's an eligibility requirement. They need to host that person, that DC, at their premises where they're based, and supervise them, or, as I said, to use associated partners linked to them as a beneficiary to do this. And then no more than 40% of the EU contribution may be allocated to beneficiaries who are based in the same country. So we do expect to see a real, pan-European collaboration through these projects that isn't just driven by one participating country, primarily. So who can apply? Then it's any legal entity worldwide, but not all applicants are eligible for funding. I mean, this is spelled out in the official call documents, but essentially it's European Union or Horizon Europe associated countries are eligible for funding, as are lower and middle income third countries. So this is this kind of sort of jargon that we have, but it's countries who can participate but who are not Horizon Europe associated countries or EU member states. And there's a group of these countries you can see in the documentation. They're consortium-based projects, as I've said, and then it's possible in some cases that you can make an exceptional case for some countries in this category, so who are non-EU countries but not low and middle income countries, if that makes sense. It's possible to make an exceptional case that they should be funded. We do have, for example, several projects in which there's a Canadian university participating and they receive EU funding, and because their participation was deemed absolutely essential to the project, they are associated to Horizon Europe, but only for the first pillar. So this is an example of, sorry, for the second pillar. MSCA is in the first pillar, and this is an example of the kind of exceptional funding of a country which is a non-EU, non-associated, non-low and middle income country. Okay, so then on the eligible size, I've mentioned this previously, but I think it's just useful to recap here. It's a maximum 48-month project for the standard doctoral network. As I say, the EU funding usually covers up to 36 months for the PhD student to undertake their project. For the first year of the project, it's typically to set up the consortium, draft the consortium agreement, launch the recruitment, which is important, and I'll come on to this for the cohort of PhD students. And so this is why the EU funding is 36 months for the doctoral network for the PhD students to undertake their project. It's, as I say, longer for the joint doctorates. It's up to 60 months. And the secondments I've mentioned, it's important to bear in mind that it's up to 540 person months for all three types of action. So although the joint doctorates projects are longer, the actual person months, so the time you can fund the PhD students to do their project, that actually is the same. So it means that there's usually less, the doctoral networks projects are actually less in terms of funding overall, and fewer partners. Eligible researchers, so this is important. Obviously, researchers must be doctoral candidates, so this is people who don't already have a doctoral degree, a PhD degree, at the date they are recruited. It's also an eligibility condition that they are enrolled in a PhD program. We don't expect that the PhD program finishes during the project, but all we expect to see, and we require, is that they are enrolled in a PhD doctoral program. Recruitment is it's a very important process, of course. As soon as, if a project is funded, we expect to see then an open, transparent recruitment process for all doctoral candidates, which corresponds to the high-level European Charter and Code for the recruitment of researchers and so on. We also have a mobility rule, which states that the individual recruited as a doctoral candidate cannot have basically spent more than 12 months in the last 3 years in the same country where they will be recruited. We can advise further on this, but this is the sort of basic mobility rule that we expect to see respected. So this is something that you need to be sure about when you're recruiting that basically there needs to be an added value of the PhD candidate joining a host institution, and they cannot have spent more than 12 months in the 3 years preceding their recruitment in the same country. So I hope that is clear. This, I think I will go very quickly through because I've covered it already. So for this call, it's a requirement that researchers are enrolled in a doctoral program in at least one EU member state or associated country. And I've mentioned this exception already, that you can see that's the second point. So this, I mean, not to go through this, but this is a kind of neat visual summary, I think, of the different features of the 3 different actions, 3 different funding schemes or types of action. So I will just leave that as a kind of reference slide. On the funding mechanism then, so just to recap how this works. I've been referring to person month, so this is how the funding is calculated. It's based on a unit cost reimbursement. So 1 unit equates to 1 person month. We can fund up to 540 person months as a maximum. So typically this equates to projects which, as a maximum, they recruit up to 15 doctoral candidates and lasting for 4 years maximum. Often the funding is in the range of 4 million per project. It can be less, of course, if this is what's needed for the project. It's 100% reimbursement rate for all eligible beneficiaries. And there are 2 key different cost categories, and the next slide covers these in a little bit more detail. So there's a living allowance, and as I mentioned, this has been slightly increased this year. Unfortunately, it's the only allowance that's been increased, but nonetheless, that is something. This is a fixed monthly contribution, basically to cover the salary of the recruited doctoral candidate, and to cover their training and networking as well. The mobility allowance then is for their private mobility related costs. So this is typically things like travel and accommodation while on secondment, or in moving to a new country at a host organization. And these 2 allowances are paid in most cases through the salary of the researcher. It depends a little bit on your organizational practice, but this is normally how it works. And as I mentioned, the living allowance is subject to this country correction coefficient, which reflects the cost of living, the different cost of living in different EU countries, and that is changed every call and every MSCA work program. We then have a family allowance and a long-term leave allowance and a special needs allowance. These can be basically triggered in case that the doctoral candidates have a family. I mean, for the family allowance, we pay, I think it's a standard amount as part of the grant agreement to each project, on the assumption that there will be, I think it's 2 doctoral candidates who have a family. This includes marriage or a status, a relationship with equivalent status to a marriage. I recently had a case where on one project where 2 doctoral candidates got married on the same project, so we had to trigger the family allowance. And then there's a long-term leave allowance. This is, I think it's for leave of over 30 days, which needs to be documented basically in our system. On the institutional unit contributions then, so it's important to know that these are paid to the institution. So the cost categories on the left are paid to the researcher directly, and the institutional unit costs are paid to the institution. There are 2 categories. So there's the research, training, and networking category, as well as the management and indirect costs. There's no kind of definitive list of eligible costs for the research and training category, but it should be the sort of the professional activities which are required for the training and for the research activities on the project. It's important to note that we sometimes get the question also from the doctoral candidates that we don't expect them to pay for their costs for things like visas, tuition fees, conferences, travel, accommodation from the allowances. Typically, they should be paid through the institutional costs. Accommodation on secondments, I should say. So costs for secondments, that is sort of borne by the host organization, but then can be covered through the institutional costs. So this is really how we manage it. I should also say we don't ever audit the institutional unit contributions. So we trust institutions essentially to use it in the right way. It's also possible to redistribute some of this money if there's unspent funds, or if there's a shortfall in other areas. You can sort of use the institutional costs to do that. So I hope that is clear and useful, but happy to answer questions on that later maybe. So then I go fairly quickly through the next section. There's just a couple of slides. We have this additional funding possibility in this year's Doctoral Networks call. It's called the RAISE Doctoral Network. So this is something that's come from another part of Horizon Europe, the collaborative research under Cluster 4. And that's where the budget comes from as well. So this is important to note. This is additional funding on top of the 590 million euros for the Doctoral Networks call. It's basically an additional funding opportunity for projects that aim to develop artificial intelligence applications, tools within their research projects. It can be new systems and methodologies as well. And it's something that it's a pilot scheme at the moment. So you can see there the budget is quite limited, but it is additional, as I mentioned. We expect to fund maybe only 7 or 8 projects, but it's really trying to respond to the fast-moving nature of AI in research, and it's really focused on developing new, as it says, tools or systems. How does it work in practice? Basically, in the application, I think it's in the part B2 as it says there. The consortia or the applicants need to demonstrate that their proposal falls within the remit of the RAISE call. So the proposal will be evaluated firstly as all the other MSCA DN proposals, and then if it scores highly and is not funded in one of the standard evaluation panels, it will then be part of essentially a reserve list, a cross-panel reserve list of proposals which have all opted into the RAISE call. So they've declared that the proposal falls into the scope of the RAISE call. And then as part of the evaluation process, as part of our central week of evaluation, where all the evaluators come and in person evaluate proposals, there'll be a cross-panel list and a cross-panel kind of group of experts who will evaluate these proposals. So it's an additional reserve list of proposals, essentially. If the proposal scores 100 out of 100 and it's opted into RAISE, it will be funded under the standard call. If it scores highly but is not funded under the standard call, it will then go into this RAISE reserve list. I hope that is clear enough. But again, happy to answer any questions later. Okay, so very quickly on the evaluation process, I know Raquel is going to cover this also. But just to highlight this, I think it's useful for reference. So all proposals are evaluated on the sort of 3 key criteria: excellence, impact, and implementation. You can see here what is expected in each proposal. You can also see here the weighting. So 50%, 30%, and 20%. I mentioned earlier the 3 out of 5, which this corresponds to, and the new kind of rule on the threshold that you need to have scored this minimum in each criterion. And then there's the priority list the priority order in terms of if proposals score exactly the same score at the end of the evaluation. So, I mean, this is in more detail in the work program, but this is essentially how it works, that proposals scoring the same will be prioritized in terms of their excellence, then their impact, and then their implementation. Okay, so I hope that is clear and useful for reference. The proposal, I mean, very quickly, because I know I should finish. You submit a proposal basically, so you need to do this for this call by 24th of November. There's then an eligibility check. Proposals are allocated to expert evaluators. So we have a huge pool of expert evaluators who we engage to evaluate proposals every year. This is firstly done individually. So we assign proposals to the experts based on obviously the content of the proposal and the expertise of the expert. There's a minimum of 3 experts per proposal. They do this firstly remotely. They then come together to do this as in a group as a consensus. So it's firstly done remotely and then in person during a sort of specific week, which usually takes place in February. And then the panel reaches an agreement on the scores, and then basically we do the checks for consistency and for the ranking list. You can see there the process for raise as well, which I've mentioned. But it's at the moment it's a single stage application, so there isn't a 2-stage application process where you submit an outline proposal by a certain date and then a more detailed one if you're scored highly enough. This is being discussed maybe for the next EU funding program starting in 2028. I mean, it's not decided yet, but for the moment it's still a single stage application process. Okay, so I realize I've mentioned this already, so I will leave this slide because it sort of summarizes what I've said about the raised evaluation process. But again, happy to take any questions on this if needed. There's one other thing I wanted to mention as well, which is on resubmission. So some of you will have probably submitted a proposal in previous years. We do have, if you look in the official documents, you can see there on the left, resubmission rules. So if the proposal scored less than 80% in the previous, so in the 2025 Doctoral Networks call, it's not possible to resubmit that proposal this year. We do have a definition of what is a resubmission. I think it's around 70% of the same partners with a substantially similar research project. So this is how we sort of check if it's a resubmission or not. But I think anyway, in the application, you need to tick whether this proposal is a resubmission, because I realize that this is a highly competitive funding program, and many proposals we see have been submitted in previous years, scored highly, and have taken on board the feedback from the evaluators. So just to mention, we do have these resubmission rules as well, but it's applies to proposals which scored under 80 out of 100. Okay, so I think I won't go through the details on the application forms. You can see here for reference. Essentially, the part B1 is the sort of core part of the proposal where you outline the proposed research and training activities. This is something that UKRI is the master of the advice to applicants. So I won't go through this in any detail, but these are some of the sort of main tips. And I know that national contact points are providing a good service in helping you in some of these practical application issues before you submit your proposal. So on the resources, then there are plenty of online resources, information, documents. I mentioned earlier this public open day that we had a few weeks ago, where you can find the video and the presentations from there. There were a lot of questions and answers submitted as part of that session, so that might be quite useful to have a look at as well. And of course, do please contact your excellent UK national contact point for detailed questions related to especially UK specific aspects of your application and what needs to be done by institutions. So that is my presentation. Oh yeah, working as an expert as well, and the call information day. Again, useful for reference. This slide is a bit like it's coming in the future. Actually, it happened 2 weeks ago, but do have a look at the presentations and the Q&A, because it really is very comprehensive and useful, I think. So to end with an inspiring quote from Marie Skłodowska-Curie, that is the end of my presentation. I'm sorry for taking quite a lot of your time, but I hope that's been a useful overview of the funding scheme and what we expect to see in applications.
Thank you very much, Edward. That was really, really useful. It was really useful to have your insights as well as a project officer and what you see as you go through those applications. So thank you very much. I will briefly, it will sort of continue what you already sort of done. So I will go through the UK participation in Horizon Europe and what does that mean for the MSCA actions, and then things to consider when it comes to form a consortium. And also I will touch on the submission process in detail. All the slides will be available and the recording will be available in the event page. So just a reminder on that. So I will share my screen very briefly and I'll try to go as quickly as possible through those slides. But if you have any questions, happy to take those right at the end. Let me just share my screen. And I will go through to the right slides very briefly. You can see my slides here.
Yes, Raquel.
Perfect. Thank you, Nina. My team, the UKRI Horizon Europe team, is part of a wider team of national contact points, and we provide support for UK-based organisations that are involved in European research and innovation. And our mission is to maximise the UK participation in Horizon Europe. To do so, we have a portal where we have dedicated news articles, events, fact sheets to support your application, and you can register to receive alerts to upcoming opportunities and call updates. We are the national contact points of the European Research Council, and we have Antonina with us today, who is the European Research Council National Contact Point, Maria Skłodowska-Curie Action Programme, the widening participation, the cost actions, and the new European Bauhaus, and we sit within UKRI's international team. So as Edward already mentioned, the UK associated to Horizon Europe and Copernicus on the 1st of January 2024. And what does that mean is UK entities can participate and coordinate projects and receive funding from Horizon Europe. There is a small exception to this rule, which is the equity element of the European Innovation Council and the EIC fund, which includes both the EIC step and the blended finance equity element of the EIC accelerator. And further information on that is available on our website. So what does that mean for the Maria Skłodowska-Curie action? So in the MSCA Doctoral Networks, more specifically, the UK-based organisations can participate as a beneficiary or associated partners. UK organisations can again coordinate projects, they can award PhD, and they can host secondments. And just a reminder that the recruited doctoral candidates that are hosted at UK organisations count towards the total number of person months of the overall consortium. Now moving on to things to consider when it comes to sort of form the consortium. So it's about when it comes to your consortium, and it might be that you already have a starting point or you're sort of hoping to join an existing consortium, you can use different ways to sort of finding partners. One of the most useful platforms is the MSCA matchmaking platform, where is all the members that are verified and ratified by the MSCA national contact group of national contact points. So you can join there to offer your expertise or sort of offer people to join your consortium. You can make use of your existing networks, and before you start contacting potential partners, one of the things that maybe you should be asking yourself, whether is your online present, current and impactful and up to date, and you need to be clear on what your contributions to the projects will be. So what will be your role in the project, basically. You can also make use of the cost actions, which are bottom-up networks with a duration of up to 4 years that boost research, innovation and career. And there you can join running actions as a participant instead of sort of proposing your own action. You can also check CORDIS. So CORDIS is the EU database for funded projects. And then there you can access previous projects in your research field for potential collaborators as well. Once that it comes to setting up your consortium, I think it's important that once that you start engaging with your partner, you sort of agree on the following things. So you need to understand how each of the PhD project will fit into the overall project, what role each of the consortium partners will have in the consortium, trying to avoid duplication. So you don't want two partners doing the same thing in the consortium. So make sure that everyone has a clear and distinctive role in the consortium. Think about the resources that you will need as a consortium, who will be supervising who, and if there are junior supervisors in the consortium, whether they need mentoring or co-supervisors. Any training that the consortium might need. The other thing that we'll always advise people to start early is to sort of discuss the budget allocation, even though that uses the unit cost. The institutional unit costs often are used for central activities like summer camps, or it could be for a project to hire project managers. So make sure that those discussions happen early in the consortium so they understand what percentage will be allocated to those. And also the modus operandi of the consortium, so who will be doing what and when. So make sure that everyone is clear on that. Another thing that we often get a lot of questions about is the international tuition fees. So we understand that this is a recurring issue for MSCA Doctoral Networks in the UK, that they can be quite high for international students. And it's really up to the institution to determine the tuition fees to charge to the doctoral candidates recruited as part of the doctoral networks. Their approaches vary by institutions. There are some examples in here, like completely waiving the fees or charging reduced rates or a home rate. That really depends on your institution and the internal practices. Under no circumstances, the fellow should be asked to use their research allowance to pay for their tuition fees or the visa fees. And a reminder that the fellow should be treated on equivalent terms than the staff members. We publish an article on that, and the link is available in there. Before you sort of get started, I think there are a few questions that when you sit down with maybe with a consortium that you can ask, what's the overarching research question, and how this will be achieved through the individual PhD projects. What are the project's research objectives, and see if they're pertinent to the topic that you're proposing. Are they measurable? Are they verifiable? Are they realistic? Does the project go beyond the current state of the arts, and what methods will you be using? Are they novel enough? And think about the skills that are needed for the doctoral candidates in the proposed research area. Think that this one will be the workforce of the near future. So what and where they will be in 4-10 years time from now. Think about the long-term employability, the skills that they will need for them, and how this network will contribute to Europe's innovation landscape. You will also need to think about how the network will increase the doctoral training within Europe and beyond. So long-term sustainability is important. It's not just for the full duration of the doctoral network, but also beyond that. And how the results will be exploited and communicated. And I'll go through that in more detail in the next slides. And think about the research data management and the gender dimension of your project. So moving on to the dissemination, exploitation, and communication. So the dissemination, exploitation, and communication are the core components of the impact section. So the second section of your proposal within part B. So dissemination is about promoting and raising awareness of the project results. Exploitation is about using those results for commercial purposes or in public policy making. And the communication is about making your research activities known to the society through public engagement. On your proposal, you must describe describe the measures to maximize the project's impact, including the groups that you will be targeting and why, how the proposed activities will be monitored using maybe key performance indicators. Think about the one or the two-way communication that will include. It is also a good practice to include separate word packages, specifically for the exploitation, dissemination, and communication activities. And just remember that the activities need to happen throughout the entire project lifetime, not just at the end to tick a box. If funded, a detailed plan for dissemination and exploitation of results must be submitted. So this is just a reminder that if you get funded, you will need to submit that as a deliverable. In terms of expected impact, MSCA Doctoral Network results should contribute to wider long-term impact and typically involve the use of results by direct target group. So it is, there are three sort of distinctive type of impact. The scientific impact, just to name a few, is about creating high quality new knowledge, strengthening the human capital in research and innovation, fostering diffusion of knowledge and open science. The societal impact is about addressing EU policy priorities and global challenges, delivering benefits and impacts via research and innovation missions, and in strengthening the uptake of research and innovation in society. And last but not least is the economic impact. So it's about generating innovation-based growth, creating more and better jobs, and leveraging investment in research and innovation. Depending on the project that you are proposing, there might be one or more of those expected impacts. So it is important to justify and explain how the stated impacts are credible, are relevant and achievable. And also if your project doesn't have or doesn't expect to have a significant economic or technological or societal impact, to explain why. That's it from the things to consider. And now we'll move to the submission process, which I've sort of divided in 6 steps, which at some point they are interchangeable too. So you will need to submit your proposal in the EU Funding September portal. That looks something like the screenshot right at the bottom. You will register and create an account there. It's important that you familiarize yourself with all the available guidance, and we'll see in the next few slides where that sits within the core page. Speak to your host institution to understand what sort of support they might be able to provide, especially if you are the coordinator. It's important that you start the application early on the system. Remember that you can submit as many times as you like, and only the last submission will be safe and taken for evaluation, and submit early and often. So who's involved in the submission process? There are various actors or organizations. Some of them will be the coordinator, then the beneficiary or the associated partner. So the coordinator is the person who registered the draft proposal in the EU funding portal. It will include the acronym, the summary, and the panel. It will be adding partner organizations with their PIC codes and contact details that will complete Part A, which is the administrative form, and they will be responsible for uploading the Part B1 and Part B2 as a PDF. The beneficiary their additional contact. They will check that the information included in Part A is correct. They will also be responsible for completing this relevant section of Part A, but other parts, they're only blocked and available for the coordinator. And then the associated partners, they don't have access to the EU funding portal. And if you want to grant them access, the only way is that key contacts are included under their corresponding beneficiary or coordinator. So the core page looks something like that. So if you type under funding, the core page, it will list and then it will take you to that page. On the left-hand side, you will see that the condition documents, that's where you will find all the core documents there. You can register right in the top corner where it says sign in. And then you can only choose one of the types there. Make sure that you choose the right type of doctoral network, because if you choose the wrong one and then you save your draft, the only way to start and the only way to rectify that is to start a new draft proposal. Then you will need to put your PIC number, or the PIC number for your host institution. There will be a little reminder that will pop up to say that you need at least 3 EU member states or associated countries, with at least one of them from the EU member state. And then you will need to add the contact person, which often is your research office. And then you're going to start adding your partners there, or the associated partner right at the bottom was the ones that you register yourself in there. You're going to start adding the partners. To do so, you will need the PIC number or the name, and then start adding the details in there. Details about the call are available on the left-hand side, and then the template is available for downloading on the left-hand side too. So you will download the template, Part B, and then that will be divided into Part B1 and Part B2. You will complete that offline and upload it as a PDF. We'll see that in more detail in the next few slides. If for whatever reason you have some issues with your application or something is not working, there is support available at the bottom left corner of your screen. You're going to start the application there, and there are, as I said, there are 2 parts. The Part A is the administrative part, which you complete online. You can save and go back to that one as many times as you need to. And then you have the Part B2. As I said, you download it on the left-hand side and then work on that, and then upload it as a PDF right at the bottom of the right corner there. And then it will come to the panel selections. For those who applied last year, they will see that the format is slightly different. So the EU Funding and Tenders portal has changed its sort of format or preface in there, so it's slightly different. So as an applicant, you must select one of the scientific panels. And then depending on the panel that you decide, you can choose the different sub-panels and then different descriptors. Just remember to select the keywords or descriptors, 3 to 5, that best fit your proposal, and do not select those by popularity or success rates. The eligible proposals will be evaluated under the selected scientific panel, and the budget panel will be determined by the number of proposals received. So if there is a high number of proposals in the engineering panel, they will receive a higher budget than the other panel. Just a reminder that the list of up to 5 publications, projects and infrastructure, it doesn't need to be completed, neither by the beneficiary or the associated partners. So you can leave that section blank. A yellow warning will come out saying that you haven't completed that section. You can ignore that and still submit. It's not a red warning that won't let you to submit. But however, that information needs to be described in the relevant section of Part B2. So make sure that you include that in the Part B2. Now is the budget table. For those that submitted a proposal last year, it looks slightly different, but the information is basically the same. So by introducing the PIC number, the organization will recognize that in this case, it was UKRI. So it's a UK organization. So the country correction coefficient will be automatically applied. You will need to enter on there the number of recruited researchers and the number of person months. And the system automatically will assume that 70% of the doctoral candidates will be eligible for family allowance. That will be corrected when the proposal is awarded, depending on the number of doctoral candidates eligible for family allowance. We're still on the part A, on the administrative part. There is a section for the ethics and security. There are several questions that you need to complete depending on where your project has any ethical issues or any ethical implications. And then you will need to say yes and no to the following questions. If you answer yes to any of the questions, you might be required to provide a brief statement or to upload some documents. And just remember that institutions in the UK will need to answer yes to the question of whether any of the activity will be carried out in non-European countries and list the UK as the country. This will not affect your eligibility, and if there are any ethical sensitivities, that will be assessed by a different panel. So the proposal, I think Edward already sort of touched on that, is divided in 3 areas. So Part A, Part B1 and Part B2. The Part B1, it has the section 1 to 3, which are the excellent impact, quality and efficiency of implementation. That comprises 30 pages. In addition to that, there are 4 pages that are the start page, the table of content, the list of participating organization and declaration tables, and that counts as 4 pages, totaling 34 pages. It's important that you respect the instructions in terms of margins, font sizes, etc. And remember that if you include any additional pages, will be disregarded by the evaluators. And then the Part B2 is the sections 4 to 9, which includes the recruitment strategy, the supervisory board. So there is a little table there for the supervisory board, the participating organization, environmental consideration, etc. There is no overall page limits for that one. And also that will be if you're applying for a raised doctorate network, that's where you will provide the justification. The letter of pre-agreement for the doctorate networks joint doctorates, it will also be included in there. So that one again will be uploaded as a PDF on the proposal. When it comes to formatting rule, the minimum font size is 11. Again, this already been covered by Edwards, except for the footnotes. All the margins are at least 15 millimeters, so please do not try to circumvent that rule. Font sizes, just explain in there. Literature reference should be listed at the footnote. And remember that the page formatting will be systematically checked by the REA, so try not to circumvent any rules, please. Any hyperlink information will be disregarded, so please do not include any hyperlinks on your proposals, and follow the rules for headers and page number as specified. Save the files using the specified format, which is listed on the proposal template, and the naming convention there. Richard has already touched on that, so I won't go into too much detail, but applicants who have scored below 80% in the previous course are not eligible to resubmit a similar proposal for the 2026 call. REA will be flagging any similarities with previous proposals, and they have a system in place to do so. And the final eligibility criteria will be decided by the REA Admissibility and Eligibility Committee. Further information on that is available in the guide for applicants on the page 7 if you want to see that in more detail. So in terms of resources and timeline, so the call is now open. It opened on the 28th of May. Deadline for submission is the 24th of November, 5 p.m. Brussels time, 4 p.m. UK time. So make sure that you don't miss the deadline by an hour. So 4 p.m. UK time. Proposals will be informed of the outcome of the evaluation by April 2027, and the grant agreement is expected, or the first grant agreements are expected to be signed by July 2027, with a start date from September 27. As I said, submit early and often. Use the EU funding portal as a way to save your draft proposal and continue submitting. Here's a list of resources, many of those already been covered by Edward, but just to complement his proposal, and thank you very much. nothing in life is to be feared, it's only to be understood. And now it's time to understand more so that we can fear less. So thank you very much for listening. I think we're going to go to, let me just get back to stop sharing. We're going to have a quick break before we welcome Ricketts to go through his experience of applying to the doctoral networks and some hints and tips. We've gone slightly over the time, so if I can ask you to be back by 11:20, that will be fantastic. So see you shortly. Thank you. Welcome back, everyone, and thank you very much for joining us today. Now I will hand over to Richard, who will go through his experience of applying and securing a few of MSCA Doctoral Networks and innovative training networks, as they used to be called before. Over to you, Richard.
Okay, thank you very much, Raquel, and thank you for the invitation. It's very kind of you, and I think it's a real worthwhile endeavour to share some of my experiences of Marie Curie doctoral networks over the past nearly 20 years now. I've been involved in these, and have been a real backbone for my research experience as an academic, and an essential part, an essential ingredient of my overall research strategy. Can everybody see the slides? Yep. Okay.
Yes, Richard.
We'll talk a bit about consortium building. We'll also discuss funding, and then we'll go on to recruitment and supervision. And at the end, there'll be a short series of slides, which I call Mythbusters, which are often about misconceptions about kind of EU funding more generally, as well as the kind of Marie Curie kind of type activities. So I've been fortunate to work with some of Europe's best researchers through various activities. I've been involved in now 4 ITNs or doctoral networks, starting in 2009 with SpineFX, and I'm currently involved in one that's led by KU Leuven, Custom, which began last year. I've also been involved in a couple of larger kind of Pillar 2 type activities, one from 2013 to 2018 and one from 2017 to 21. And in both those cases, it was the fact that I'd undertaken SpineFX that allowed me to participate in those. Firstly, in lifelong joints, a number of the core people who were involved in SpineFX were then recruited into lifelong joints to form the major beneficiaries, and similarly for BioREMA as well, which was a later collaboration. I've also been a reviewer and rapporteur for EU grant funding, principally in Pillar 2. So consortium building. Often when people talk about consortium building and they explain their rationale or their process for consortium building, what it is you go and talk to your mates, you go and talk to your friends, you say, well, this is an opportunity, why don't we try and put something together? So you issue in the actors, or you work with one who you want to work with, you have some nebulous aims and objectives, and the impact becomes slightly misaligned. What I would recommend you do is to define the impact that is required by the goal, in this case, the Marie Curie activity, identify the outcomes and enhance the outputs. From those, you do the aims and objectives. You then expand that out to form the work packages, activities, and the actors needed to deliver those outputs and the uptake. And that's the crucial thing, is to marry the key players, the key stakeholders, your key beneficiaries and your key associate partners with the activities that you want to undertake as part of your doctoral network. And so you build a consortium around these functions, around these central elements. And over the past years, you can see this quite clearly in the evolution of doctoral networks, or it used to be called initial training networks, that impact has become far more important than it was, let's say, 15 to 20 years ago. So it's crucial that you define it around the impact you're intending to make and not just the aims and objectives that was the kind of old style of doing this. Nice to have partners can weaken your credibility. Evaluators will ask, a series of questions. Why is a particular partner here, and what is the partner contributing? So they'll try and marry your activities that are set out in your implementation section with your excellence section. What unique function do they perform? What examiners are less likely to be positive about is when you've got two partners who have significantly overlapping activities, and therefore it's not clear the proportion of activities between those two partners. And I suppose the credibility element comes around, if you remove one of those partners, would that have a significant impact on the overall activity of the doctoral network? So as I say, weak proposals will often include a partner that have overlapping expertise, industrial partners which appear to be added just to bolster the associate partner portfolio. There's no link between the industrial partner and the necessary exploitation, and stakeholders are listed but not integrated into the work packages. And conversely, strong proposals will demonstrate those three particular attributes there. The thing that we have to remember that this particular instrument, this particular funding process is about research training. And whatever you do in your grant, you have to ensure that research training is up and front, is right to the front of the proposal. And the research itself, although it has to be excellent, it has to go beyond the state of the art and it has to show potential impact, is really a conduit for that research training. Now, excellent research, in a sense, is the framework for your excellent research training. And the two things that you have to always keep in the back of your mind is what is the impact in terms of the career enhancement for the doctoral candidate and to society and the wider economy. So Horizons Europe, as we know, is impact driven, and that's across the board. It's not just for MSCAs. And it must include actors who can reach target groups, who can influence practice and policy, support commercialisation, so on and so forth. And therefore, the actors are not just restricted to your own domain or discipline. They must include people from industry. And as we saw earlier in Edward's presentation, that definition of industry is quite loose. It can be policymakers or regulators. In my particular case, I work in health or health engineering sector, practitioners for implementation and testing, social sciences and humanities experts, and user groups. And those may be patients, in my case, clinicians, and people who work in railways, so on and so forth. Now, it does explicitly state in the documentation that all applications should include people from social sciences and humanities. And people have often said, is that particularly true? Well, I came across a case this year in my own university, at the University of Birmingham, in which an application was significantly marked down by the evaluators because it didn't explicitly include people from social sciences and humanities. So, so just be aware of that. And those could be people who are experts in networking theory. They can be people who are experts in what they call implementation science, so how you come across barriers for introducing new products, so on and so forth. So think carefully about people within your own university or within your partners who have then skills that can define better than perhaps engineers can, in my case, things like user needs and overcome adoption barriers. So you've got to integrate social scientists and humanities personnel into your application. It does stress again within the paperwork that we've got this idea of 3 I's. You've got to keep at the back in mind that the doctoral network has to expose the doctoral candidates to ideas of internationalization, interdisciplinarity, and intersectoral activities. So the intersectoral activities is going out of academia into industry, into user-led organizations, charities, governmental organizations. And they've got to be integrated in a meaningful way. So you've got to have proper activities in which the partners, which these associate partners play a significant role. So try and avoid any tokenistic inclusion where it's not clear how those partners will be utilized in generating impact. Evaluators tend to be skeptical of a number of things. So a large number of actors doing similar technical work, there's no differentiation between them. It's not clear who's going to do what, who's responsible for delivery of certain activities, fragmented tasks, and partners that appear to be included because there's some idea of geographical balance. And we'll get to talk about that a bit later on. Design consortia that are lean, that is to say they have no additional fat on them. They don't include partners that appear to be there just for some because they're your best mates or you've worked with them before. They are complementary and they're structured around the delivery. And those are probably the three things I would advise: leanness, complementarity, and structured around the delivery. And there's a difference. You bring in your social science partners, humanities personnel to enable acceptance by key stakeholders. Remember, there's differences between stakeholders and target groups, and you should elaborate on that in your proposal. Stakeholders are anybody who's affected by your impact, by the outcomes of your project. And these may be people who would have positive experiences and also people who have negative experiences from your activities. Target groups are those who would be actively engaged in your uptake. So in my case, that would be patients. A strong consortium and a strong application will identify both and will include associate partners capable of influencing them. So if there's a potential negative aspects, you bring in associate partners who have the skills and the experience to perhaps mitigate those possible critical elements. And you engage with all your partners as early as possible. Consortium building takes a long time. I always think that because Marie Curie activities are often set, and they're set well in advance, we know the call dates, we know the submission dates, then we shouldn't really wait till the call comes out to begin our consortium development. That should take place 3 or 4 months before the call date. I often believe, and from my experience, particularly when you're developing newer consortia rather than consortia which you already have in place, that this activity can take between 3 and 6 months. It is also interrupted in the current positioning because of summer vacations. It's sometimes quite difficult to get relatively quick responses from people. They tend to be away for 3-4 weeks at a time. You've also got the start of term in Europe in September, October. So people are focused on new students, delivering the best student experience possible over that initial period. And no matter what consortium you have, you'll always get the unresponsive partner. The responsive partner who promises to deliver next week, and 3 weeks later, you still haven't got your project descriptions or your university descriptions from them. So I would, leave as much time as possible to get that right consortium. But you also need, obviously, time to write the proposal. And the advice that I often give people is that you should have a good draft in place by the end of September. And then that gives you 2 months with which to review carefully and line by line almost the text you've written and make sure it matches what is required by the EU, not what you think is required, but what is actually required by the information provided in the template and the documentation elsewhere. So Innovate UK, so this is from my experience, Innovate UK's guidance and from UKRI guidance, start at least 9 to 12 months before submission. I know that's not possible now. but we have had partners in the past because they go through a process at the University of Birmingham to try and coach or mentor people who are putting in doctoral network. That, look, if you feel as though it's going to be rushed, delay it by a year. No, get that partnership right up front. Don't rush something, because if it's rushed submitted and you get less than 80%, then you can't submit the following year. So it's best just to take your time, actually, and just have that right consortium to begin with, and then the application will flow from that. You need to understand any budget nuances early, and also get agreement from your partners, particularly in Europe, who have 4-year degree schemes rather than 3. Those particular people will have to seek additional funding from the host institutions, which can be up to 100,000 euros per annum, depending on the country. You also need early industrial engagement, and you need to guarantee up front what those industrialists, what those stakeholders can provide to the network. You also need some idea of what governance structure will be in place, and also some idea of some central coordination discipline around who will submit to the coordinator what and when. An example timeline is out there. I know we're short of time, so I'm not going to dwell on it. Funding, we've already seen this slide. There's a living allowance, and with that comes a country coefficient correction factor, which allows for equal purchasing power between doctoral candidates. What it means in the UK, in most cases, we can only apply up to five doctoral candidates, because the 40% rule is for the budget, not for the number of doctoral candidates themselves. If that was the case, you could in fact have 6 doctoral candidates in this case, but we can only have 5. Now, what does that funding allow? It allows you to, obviously you can get up to 15 doctoral candidates. It has to cover things like the incoming flights, visas, health insurance surcharge, delivery and attendance at network-wide events, any additional local training that's specific to the doctoral candidate's PhD project, fieldwork, laboratory expenses, so on and so forth. So quite a significant range of activities. So the 1,600 euros a month looks great, but it has to cover all the activities that a doctoral candidate has to take to fulfill their obligations under the scheme. Non-doctoral candidate costs are covered in the management and indirect contributions. What you'd find is that the coordinator will take between 40 and 50% of that particular contribution centrally to allow them to employ a project officer to help with the administration, and also to do some work around website and social media activities, which in my case, I just in the past employed a postgraduate researcher to do it 2 hours a week. Given for the UK, I would recommend, given the minimal overhead, you need to maximize the benefit of these particular activities through 2 other aspects. That is, that if you coordinator, maximize the doctoral candidates. What you don't want to be doing is being left with 1 or 2 doctoral candidates, but having a heavy admin burden because you're the coordinator. Ensure that other doctoral candidates within your host institution benefit from the doctoral network. In fact, as you go through, if you're successful and you're delivering a network, you have to put the number of additional students or doctoral candidates that come within, let's say, the training events you host, the local training that's provided, any candidates like that, you have to put down on the reporting website. So if you have, let's say, a network-wide event, you have 15 doctoral candidates from the network, and then you have another 30 from regional regional organizations who are partaking in that training, that would go down on the reporting mechanism. Capture the training experience, so you can use that elsewhere across the university or for other doctoral networks, such as centres for doctoral training, and also what is the strategic importance of the network in not just delivering the core research and the core research training in your network, but how can that be used to build larger grants, particularly in Pillar 2. So here's a rough cost. So this is the assumption here. You've got 3 doctoral candidates. The budget would be around €172,000, which seems, a lot of money. But if you break it down, and these are just nominal costs, obviously, the exact cost for each of those sections will depend on the individual doctoral candidates, the activities, and the research type. But you can see that as you peel off, as you contribute to the training expenses, the delivery of your own workshops, the conferences that the students will often want to go on, secondments, the actual research expenses for day-to-day laboratory consumables, so on and so forth, only comes to about 70,000, which is about €600 per month per doctoral candidate. So you've gone down from 1,600 to €600 a month. So that, in some cases, can constrain the type of research that you can do. So if, like me, you do a lot of work with cadaveric materials, clearly a doctoral candidate project, you won't have sufficient resource to do that significantly within this type of activity. So you have to manage. So you have to manage the budget and what the doctoral can do in that budgetary constraint. And that's also the same for expenses. People talk about you can go for a year to one of your associate partners, but if the associate partners aren't going to contribute to the accommodation, subsistence of that particular person doing that secondment, then there's no way you're going to have anybody going for a year on a secondment, because that would be way too expensive, particularly if you're going to some of the more expensive cities in Europe, such as those in Scandinavia or those in Switzerland. So just be careful of what you promise in your grant, because that, to some extent, is constrained by the fixed budget you have. So funding, the other thing is the funding is only for 3 years. In the UK, the model's 3.5 years, but most of our students hopefully would do all the experimentation in the first 3 years. They write up in an ad hoc basis over the next 3 months. So I would say the 3 years is okay for the UK model. For the continental model, where they do an initial training year, often around some form of MSc taught course activity, then they will generally have to gain that additional resource, that additional funding from the host institutions. You need to know early whether the host institution is willing to provide that resource. What you don't want is you get to October, November, you've written a good draft, and all of a sudden your beneficiary, your partner, is said to have to pull out because their host institution won't provide that support for the 4th year. So just be wary of that. We've had an example of that recently. We've set up a collaboration with some people from a Scandinavian university. One of the partners then pulled out because they couldn't get the additional funding for the 4th year, but that was early. So that was fine. We can manage that. That's not a problem. It becomes more difficult the later on you get. UK researchers often see this as a boost in salary if they're recruited to the UK. Not so for many of our partners. Again, they will perhaps need additional resource to cover the additional salary expense. So confirm early any additional resources that partners would need to partake in the activity. Funding pitfalls. Transferring funding is burdensome. You're placing an extra burden on your administrative staff. Try and work things out through the number of doctoral candidates and therefore the amount of resource you have to expend on network-wide events. So if you're doing training, try and make sure the training delivered by a partner is proportional to the ESRs or the doctoral candidates that they have recruited. PhD registration is now mandatory. Make sure you get agreement from your universities that if you're going to register doctoral candidates that aren't residing in your institution, but let's say in a company, and I've done that before, but they register for a PhD at your host institution, ensure that you have agreement that no international fees are required. So just make sure that that's in place. And as I said before, you are the coordinator. If you're the coordinator, it's a higher admin burden. You are the person responsible for communicating with the research executive agency. Reduce the deliverables down to as much as you can. Often, typically, that's 2 per doctoral candidate or 1 milestone, and maximize the number of doctoral candidates you're recruiting. Recruitment and supervision, get the fundamentals right. See this as a risk managed work stream. Remember that as coordinator or the scientist in charge, that's the lead person at the beneficiary, you are the responsible person for your recruitment. It's not, you can't go around blaming the admin staff. What you need to do is to make sure that your adverts are on your access, make sure they're advertised widely. If you said you're going to target groups that are underrepresented in your domain, you will need to deliver on that. Once they have been recruited, make sure also they have a proper contract in place. We had a case in one of my doctoral networks where we'd worked with a particular university before, and we found out that they weren't given contracts of sufficient quality. The project officer stepped in, and not only did we have to change contracts for that university, we also had to change contracts widely within that particular country, actually. Align recruitment, obviously, with other activities as well around supervision, training and secondment, so it becomes a seamless pipeline rather than a number of individual steps. Recruitment must be international, open and compliant with what's required under the grant agreement. All of the adverts must go on your access. And if you do say you're targeting underrepresented groups as part of your application, make sure you do that in practice. And remember that that mobility rule that Edward talked about earlier. Recruitment, do it early. Plan before the grant agreement is signed off. You don't need to wait. You can have all your adverts in place, and then once the agreement is signed, then you can post them. Whether you have a single network-wide recruitment process or whether you do it individually to each of the beneficiaries is largely up to you. I've experienced both. They have different advantages and different disadvantages. I myself prefer local arrangements rather than trying to do it centrally. But you do need, even if you do it locally, you do need representation from your other partners. Allow time for eligibility, mobility and visa checks. Record decisions, that's hugely important. Often the EU can ask for all the information that you've acquired during the interview process. They want to know scores, they want to know ranking outcomes, so on and so forth. You need to be aware, and you need to utilize EDI safeguards in advertising, shortlisting and interview practice. So good practice there is to ensure that all the people who are doing an interviewing are being on the various EDI courses, and also provide candidates with clear information on the salary that they will receive, the allowances, the secondments they're expected to go on, doctoral enrolment, supervision, and their expected mobility. And I can't stress this enough, trying, if at all possible, avoiding recruitments on what we call marginal appointments. If you have unresolved doubts and you have the time, re-advertise. I cannot stress that critically enough. If you get a poor candidate and they don't perform well in your doctoral network, it puts the doctoral network at risk because it puts your deliverables at risk. Yeah? So just be careful about that. So you have, a period of time, maybe 6 to 9 months to recruit. And that's why it's important to recruit early or to start the process early. So if you don't get the right candidate, you can re-advertise and re-interview. So what you want to do is effectively protect the quality of the network. And you want to do this through fairness of your recruitment process and through that process being auditable by the EU if necessary. Supervision, the quality of the supervision has risen up the ladder in terms of these applications. The quality, you need to suggest what supervision arrangements are, feedback mechanisms, appropriate support for the doctoral candidates outside those supervision meetings, and also about supervision oversight. You've got to mention whether, what the governance arrangements are, the doctoral schools, whether the supervisors themselves go on initial training and refresher training, all that sort of stuff. So you maintain that quality of supervision. And the European unions, the research executive agencies' view is that supervision isn't just about the technical aspects of the project, delivering the PhD, it's also about providing the doctoral candidate with the appropriate support to go on to have successful careers. And a good benchmark for a successful career is, will that person not only be a good researcher, but will they be a good leader in 5 to 10 years' time? So supervision, that's just a list there. You can read that following that. That's pretty obvious stuff. Scientific guidance, interdisciplinary input, intersectoral perspectives. So I've advised that as part of a doctoral candidate supervisory team, you have at least one member, an appropriate member from the associate partners. You want a clear and robust supervisory structure. So who's the primary supervisor that takes main responsibilities for the doctoral candidates, technical and other aspects? You also want to name the co-supervisors as well and what their contributions will be. As I said, collectively, supervision is not just about the research project. It's about nurturing independence, nurturing collaboration, and future research leadership. And that future research leadership element is hugely important. You want to see good governance structure. The supervisory board want to oversee supervision practice, monitor project. What we've done often in our or in my doctoral networks, or the ones we've been involved in, is we have monthly supervisory practice meetings, and a short report is written on a quarterly basis, which is reviewed by the supervisory board, and feedback is given. And that's a good way of trying to highlight any issues that arise within that within a doctoral candidate's performance or the performance of the supervisory team. And you want to have, as I said before, good oversight frameworks. So what you want to do is make sure that you highlight or you reference in your applications both the EU documentation around supervision quality, but also local supervision quality documentation, such as those from the Quality Assurance Agency in the UK. So mythbusters. Oh, you need large consortium. Often people say, oh, you need lots of project partners. You don't. You need the number of project partners that can deliver the project that you've defined. Yeah. Now, in my case, I've been fortunate. We've had relatively small doctoral networks. So they generally had maybe 4 or 5 beneficiaries with about between 6 to 12 associate partners, depending on the activities being undertaken. It's true, you do get some successful large consortia. They may have up to 12 beneficiaries and then a whole raft of associate partners, and they may need those number to deliver what are set out in their aims and objectives. But keep it lean. And of course, when you increase the number of partners, you're increasing the number of interfaces and therefore the number of potential problems. But you don't need big consortia. What you need is consortia that are fit for purpose, and that can be small consortia or relatively large consortia. You need, and this is probably a myth that's relatively old now, has hopefully been has gone, but often you hear this, you need East European or Mediterranean partners. That's not the case. This map here demonstrates is essentially all the partners that I've had on my doctoral networks or in initial training networks. And they've come from largely what I would call Scandinavian, Germany, Switzerland, Austria, and of course the UK. We have recently submitted some stuff where we've also partnered with people from Spain, but we've never had a Mediterranean partner, and we've never had a partner from Eastern Europe. And I'm not saying that's a good thing or a bad thing, but that's the research that we were doing, and the best players for that research were from those particular countries at that time. Opaque assessment criteria. I am very pleased, actually, with the assessment criteria that's provided by the EU, as being involved in being a recipient of reviewers' comments, but also being part of the reviewing process. I think that the overall system is fair. I don't think it's particularly opaque. I think it's probably as transparent as many other processes are for reviewing of larger grants, those grants of €4 million upwards. They give you, it's quite explicit what they're looking for. They keep the framework the same across most of their activities. So it's about excellence, impact, and quality of implementation. The weighting often remains the same. So I think actually it is a very transparent process. I know there has been some issues around rights of reply to reviewers' comments, so on and so forth. They have now introduced a redress process that I've actually submitted to this year, actually. But they do have the rapporteur where they have a consensus agreement. And I think that's a really good tool. And I think it's a tool that we in the UK actually should consider, because it prevents those comments that are sometimes a bit strange, shall we say, from being put into the review. And what the consensus process does, it makes the reviewer to justify any comments that they've made. So it's not just a case that this grant could be better in YX or they've missed something out. You've got to explain why you do think that's the case. So I think the EU process is excellent, actually, in terms of review. Clearly, there are tweaks you can have around the sides, but I think it's overall a good process. Myth 4, Marie Curie doctoral networks are not for early career academics. I think they are. And I think I got my first doctoral network when I was in my 40s, early 40s. I don't know whether that would class as that as an early career academic, but I've been in academia as a lecturer probably then 10 years, so probably not. But certainly you should be including people in your network who are early career academics and early career researchers. I often view these particular instruments as not just training for doctoral candidates, but they're for the training of a new generation of academics within your institution or the wider body. And in fact, I very much see, as you go from postdoctoral fellowship to doctoral network to staff exchanges to co-fund, as an evolution of leadership. So, you can see early career academics applying with fellows for their doctoral fellowship. It's an easy way in, or an easier way into the Marie Curie ethos. They then become part of doctoral networks, maybe as a co-applicant and eventually as a coordinator. They then build up a good body of collaborations around Europe. They put in for staff exchanges. And the peak, I suppose, is to apply for a co-fund when you have that sufficient leadership experience. So that's my view. I think you should be integrating early career academics into your doctoral networks. And as part of that, you should be explaining that you are involved in them because you're developing them around supervision and around supervision governance. Long proposals, I suppose they are relatively long. If you look at an EPSC responsive mode or a program grant, 11 and 25 sides respectively. The program grant is actually multi-stage, so it's probably more than that. Postdoctoral fellowships, 10 sides, postdoctoral network, 30 sides. It's, I would say it's possibly slightly more, but it's not substantially more for the money that you're being given, actually. So I would give that both I would be a bit more ambiguous on that one than I was before. Okay, that's all I've got to say. Thank you very much. And thank you all. Sorry, nearly ran out of time. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much, Richard, for your valuable contributions. I think it's fantastic. I love the Mythbusters. I thought they were fantastic, actually. I think we got time for a couple of questions. We're sort of near 12 o'clock now, but a couple of questions. If Blajek and Nino can raise those, please, that will be fantastic. Mindful of the time, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Many thanks, Raquel, and thank you to all three speakers. I think that you managed to answer the vast majority of questions in the Q&A part of this webinar. I think that there were still quite a few questions about the 540 person months, and that's probably a question for Raquel and Ed. Could you maybe clarify how that works in practice? What are the implications for the standard doctoral networks, the industrial doctorates, and joint doctorates, and also if there are any sort of individual funding limits for individual projects as well? Who would like to go first?
Ed, would you like to go first, or would you like me to?
I can, Raquel. Yes, if that's okay.
Yeah, happy to, and I'm happy to complement whatever if needed. Yeah.
Sure. No, I mean, it's so the 540 person months is the maximum amount of unit costs that we can reimburse. So when I said this corresponds to 15 PhD students undertaking, or doctoral candidates undertaking, a project for 3 years each. This is the kind of maximum limit that has been set. Now, of course, the individual budget will be different according to the different allowances which are paid, the different country coefficients, but this is the maximum in terms of the duration of the project. So it really corresponds to 36 person months per doctoral candidate, up to 15 doctoral candidates. That's the kind of the upper limit that we have. I don't know, do you want to add more specific details from the UK perspective, or?
I think just to remind, as Richard covered that on his presentation, is a 40% maximum allocation per country, so that will limit.
Yes.
And that includes the funding. It's not the number of person months, it's the funding. So the country correction coefficient will apply. Yes. So maximum 5, it will be per UK participants. So just to complement that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Right. If I
Any other
may follow up with another rather technical question, knowing that for most options there is a capping of 36 months per fellowship, how do we deal with PhD that have a duration of 4 years? Either Ed or Raquel or
I can take
Richard.
this one, sure.
Yeah.
Sure. If, no, this is a common question we receive, and it's not easy, I know, from the institutional point of view, when a lot of PhD programs last for 4 years. But unfortunately, I mean, this is the limit that we have. The EU funding covers the 36 months, person months, so for 3 years. I mean, for some projects, we see that institutions offer a sort of top up, or a kind of they are able to finance the 4th year of the PhD program. I know this is not in all cases, but it's unfortunately the limit that we have, that it's 36 person months. So that does have to be a kind of institutional solution found, I would say, for the 4th year. I know that's easy to say and not easy to implement in practice. I don't know if Richard or Raquel want to add to that, or.
I think the other option as well is the joint doctorate. So the joint doctorates can be up to 48 months. So that's an alternative to not circumvent, yes, but to sort of get funding for 48 months for longer PhD duration. I don't know, Richard, what was your experience in Birmingham? What do you do with the longer duration? How do you cover those?
Well, for the UK partners, it's not particularly an issue. It tends to be an issue for our consortium, which have the 1+3 model. There, we always advise that people get agreement early on when they're building their consortium that the university will cover the additional cost by whatever means. That prevents you then having to rejig a comprehensive proposal in, if there is an issue in kind of October, November time. And you just have to put in place that agreement. And if they say, yes, we can fund it, take it on trust and go forward. There's, it has to be that kind of trust element to it, I think, as well. But get that verbal agreement or that email agreement that they will fund the additional 4 years. And it includes not just the kind of 3 versus 4 year, but also, in places like Germany, where their PhD students are paid a salary in any case, you will find that in some places the salary is higher than what the EU is offering in terms of their doctoral candidate salary.
Complement, yeah. I think, do we have time for one more question? Sorry, Blodgett, you were just about to say something or raise.
Yeah, it's really just to end with a sort of question, if I may, Raquel, about the future calls. So there was already a question which I know you answered, but if someone doesn't have the time to, we obviously want people to apply to this particular call in 2026. But if someone doesn't have the time, where can they find the details of the 2027 call? Are the rules going to be the same? And can we expect similar deadlines and so on?
I believe the call deadline is the 23rd of November for the 2027 call, and all the information is available in the work program 26-27. The call is also available as forthcoming in the EU fundings and tender portal, so all the information is publicly available, and the rules are not expected to change, or at least we've not been informed that they will change as they are now.
Mm-hmm. Ed, would you like to add anything to that?
No, that's right. I mean, it's as Raquel says, the 2027 call is indicated in this 2-year work program that we have now, the official legal document. I think it's very much the same as you say. It's call opening on late May 27 and closing in late November 27. I think the budget is already indicated as well, but I think it's a similar budget. So we probably can expect a similar success rate, I suppose. But yes, as Raquel says, there are no major changes. There may be sort of, also as Richard alluded to, sort of tweaks or small changes to improve the evaluation process, or I'm not sure what's going to happen with the RAISE pilot scheme, but I think it may continue as well, hopefully with this additional budget. So I think a lot of mostly continuity we'll see for the 2027 call as well.
It's brilliant. Thank you very much. And I just added a link to the work program for those interested. It's in the chat. Thank you, everyone. Mm-hmm.
I think with that, we're going to need to wrap up now. It's 7 minutes past 12. I mean, we could continue answering questions, but we'll be here probably all day. So I think we need to give it a close. I just would like to thank you very much to our guest speakers. Thank you very much, Richard, for joining us today. Your insights were extremely valuable, and thank you, Edward, again for covering all the information about the call. So very much appreciated your presence in here, and also thank you to Blodgett and Nina for helping out with the questions, although we didn't have much time for answering many questions. If you have any further questions or any of your questions haven't been answered, please feel free to email us at mariecurie-uk@acra.ac.uk, and probably Blodgett will put the email address in the chat. I can see him nodding. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a good rest of your day, and speak to you soon. Good luck with your applications.
Bye,
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you.